So when we're looking at giftedness, it usually starts right around 130, maybe 126, 127, depending on the tests, the batteries. But look at that. It really is quite far removed from the norm. If this is the norm right here at 100 IQ, if this is the scale of IQ, we really consider 70 to 130 is average. 95% of our students are average. They might be low average, average, or high average. But when we get outside of this, we call these standard deviations away from the norm. When we get outside of the 130, these kids fall outside of the average. That means that the regular curriculum, the regular instruction, the textbooks, they're not going to meet the learning needs of those students without some understanding of how these kids learn and some modifications of the content and the pacing that we need to provide. Now let's take a look at the same distance in the other direction. These students around here, 3 standard deviations from the norm on the left side of the bell curve of the average, there's interventions in our schools for them, and rightfully so. We really do need to provide resources, assistance, curriculum for those students so that they can work to their potential. Unfortunately, there's not a lot given in our federal, from the feds for the gifted students on this side. That's why we have to, it's so important what we do in the classroom and in the school and in the school district. And we're going to talk more about that as we go. Oh, one more thing I wanted to point out here. Notice I said about the social, emotional, and academic needs. The further you are removed from the average, the norm, in this direction, you're going to have different affective concerns, different social, emotional needs. The same holds true for this direction, on the right. So that's why it's so important that we provide a lot of training for teachers, because we know that when kids feel better about themselves and feel understood and accepted, they're going to take more academic risks, they're going to make more academic growth, and they're going to feel better about themselves when they're around other students that look and learn and feel like them. And that's why we want to provide these services. When we look at the general population, when we're looking at giftedness, we just said that the average IQ is about 100, right? So there's bright kids, around 110, and they're about 27 and 100. 120 IQ, around 11 and 100. But look when you get up to 130 IQ, which is pretty much where the gift identification begins. 3 and 100. That's a very small part of our population, and that's why we need to measure that and know that before we